Tonight, I drove my husband to the airport thinking it was just another business trip. As I turned to head back home, my 7-year-old son grabbed my wrist so hard his nails dug into my skin. He leaned close and whispered, "Mom, don't go back to the house. This morning I heard Dad planning something about us. Please, this time you have to believe me." For the first time ever, I listened. I turned the car away from our street and hid in the dark to watch our own home. And what I saw next still haunts me. Before we get into it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. A few hours earlier, the lights in the departure hall had been blinding. The air conditioning was icy against the warmth of Daniel's arms around Laura's shoulders. Beside them, their quiet 7-year-old son Ethan clutched the straps of his dinosaur backpack, watching everything with those serious eyes of his. Daniel looked as always like the perfect husband: crisp blue shirt, polished shoes, easy smile. "This trip is really important, honey," he told Laura in that deep, reassuring voice, crouching to ruffle Ethan's hair. "Take care of Mom while I'm gone, champ. I'll only be away a few days." Ethan hadn't smiled. He just nodded once, his gaze fixed on his father's face as if trying to memorize it. Laura had taken that for shyness. Her boy was observant, not expressive, more likely to watch than to talk. Daniel had kissed Ethan's forehead, then Laura's, promising to call as soon as he landed, telling them he loved them and to go straight home and get some rest. They'd watched his back grow smaller and smaller until he vanished behind the glass doors, swallowed by the airport and the night. On the walk back through the dim parking garage, the silence between mother and son felt heavy. Laura tried to lighten it, offering hot chocolate when they got home, guessing he was just tired. The lot was almost empty, their footsteps echoing as they reached the car. She unlocked it with a beep of the fob and reached for the driver's door, only to feel that sudden, desperate pull on her wrist. Ethan's face, washed in the yellowish light, was ghost pale. His fingers dug into her skin like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. "Ethan, sweetheart, what's wrong?" she asked, kneeling so their eyes were level. "Did you see something?" He shook his head hard, swallowing, lips trembling. Then he leaned in until his mouth was almost at her ear. "Mom," he breathed, "don't go home. Please. We can't go back." Confused, she tried to soothe him, saying it was late and they needed to sleep. He shook his head again, more violently. "No, I mean it. This morning I heard Dad on the phone in his office. He was talking about us, about doing something after we were asleep. His voice was wrong. It scared me. Please, Mom. This time, believe me." Those words hit Laura like a hammer. This time. She suddenly remembered every moment she'd brushed him off. The time he'd said a strange man was watching their house from a parked car. The way he'd said he didn't like one of Daniel's business friends. She'd chalked it up to childish imagination, told him to be polite, to stop worrying. Now she was staring into eyes full of terror, not fantasy. Daniel had just kissed her and told her he loved them, boarding a plane to another city with a perfect alibi. It made no sense. But what if there was even the smallest chance Ethan was right? Her heart pounding, Laura made a decision she never thought she'd make. "Okay," she whispered, wiping tears from his cheeks. "I believe you." She buckled him into the back seat, slid behind the wheel and turned the ignition with shaking hands. But instead of driving toward their neat, familiar neighborhood, she took the long way around and stopped in a dead-end side street behind a row of closed shops. From there, she could see the gated entrance to their subdivision in the distance, a faint glow of streetlights marking the road to their home. She switched off the engine and all the lights, plunging the car into darkness. Crickets chirped in the weeds nearby, and every distant engine sounded too loud. Ethan sat rigid in the back seat, staring straight ahead at the gate. Laura kept checking the clock. 9:40, 9:50. Each minute stretched into an hour. Doubts crept in. What was she doing, hiding in a dark car because of something a child thought he'd heard? Daniel would be halfway to his destination by now, probably sipping airplane coffee, unaware his wife and son were sitting in a cul-de-sac like fugitives. Guilt twisted inside her. She thought of Daniel's tired smile, his hugs, the way he'd always provided for them. Maybe Ethan had just misheard. Maybe it had been a business call. The night air seeped through the car, cold and damp. Maybe I overreacted, she whispered, more to herself than to her son. Maybe we should just go home. It'll be warmer there. Ethan didn't take his eyes off the subdivision gate. Wait, Mom, he said quietly, his voice tight. Just a little longer. There was a certainty in his tone that silenced her. She exhaled and decided to stay until 10, just 10 o'clock. Right as the digital clock on the dashboard flipped to 10 p.m., twin beams of headlights swung around the corner toward the subdivision. Laura instinctively ducked, tugging Ethan down with her, even though the car was far away and hidden in shadow. A dark van, unmarked and with tinted windows, rolled slowly up to the gate and slipped inside when the guard opened it. It wasn't any neighbor's car she recognized. It moved too slowly, like a predator stalking its prey. The van crawled along the main road, then turned down the street where their house sat, number 17, center of the block. The vehicle eased to a stop right in front of their gate. Laura's stomach knotted. Coincidence, she told herself, but the word felt thin. Two men climbed out of the front seats, dressed in dark jackets and caps, pulled low over their faces. They didn't look around nervously like burglars. They moved with calm, practiced precision. Laura expected them to scale the fence or break a lock. Instead, one of them reached into his pocket and took out a small, glinting object, a key. He slid it into the gate's lock, turned it, and the metal swung open with a soft click. No, Laura hissed, clapping her hand over her mouth. Only two people had keys to that gate, her and Daniel. She watched, frozen, as the men walked up the path and did the same thing at the front door. Another key, another easy click, as if they lived there. They slipped inside and closed the door behind them like polite guests. This wasn't a robbery. Robbers didn't let themselves in. This was something planned, something sanctioned. The air seemed to thicken around her as she stared at the dark shape of her home, now occupied by strangers with her husband's keys. Minutes crawled by. Then a sharp chemical smell drifted toward the car on the light breeze, cutting through the night air. Gasoline. Ethan flinched, smelling it too. Mom, what is that? He whispered. Laura's gaze was glued to the second-floor window that overlooked Ethan's room. A faint flicker of orange appeared behind the curtains. Too bright, too alive to be a flashlight. Another flare glowed in the living room window. The white curtains turned lurid orange, then began to darken at the edges. They're burning our house, Ethan choked, his voice breaking. Laura's world tilted. This wasn't some rough warning or stage break-in. If they'd gone to bed like Daniel had told them to, if Ethan hadn't spoken up, they would be inside that house right now, asleep in those rooms. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her shock. With trembling fingers, she pulled it out. A text from Daniel flashed on the screen. Just landed. Hope you and Ethan are sleeping soundly. Love you both so much. Her stomach lurched. She shoved the door open, staggered out, and vomited onto the cold asphalt, her whole body shaking. By the time she could stand again, the fire had grown into a roaring monster. Flames punched through Ethan's bedroom window, glass exploding outward in glittering shards. Black smoke billowed into the sky, carrying the bitter stench of burning plastic and memories. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. The front door burst open and the two men in dark jackets sprinted out, faces obscured, moving quickly but not frantically. They slipped into the van, reversed without turning on their headlights, and vanished around the corner just as the first fire engine screamed through the subdivision gate. Laura gripped the steering wheel when she got back into the car, knuckles white. Every instinct screamed at her to run to the firefighters, to shout that her husband had tried to kill her. But she saw, in her mind's eye, what Daniel would do, fly home in tears, clutching his chest, talking about gas leaks and tragedy, playing the grieving husband who texted his family moments before disaster struck. Laura, hysterical, would sound unhinged. Ethan's story about overheard phone calls would be dismissed as trauma, a child's mind trying to make sense of horror. Daniel's alibi would be spotless. She started the engine and drove away from the glow of their burning home, away from the sirens and the neighbors who would soon gather in their pajamas. She couldn't go to any of their friends. All of them were also Daniel's friends. She had no close relatives nearby. Her wallet, IDs, and cash were gone, turned to ash with her handbag on the living room table. All she had was the car, her phone, the clothes on their backs, and her son. As fear tried to crush her, a memory surfaced of her father's study, his serious eyes, and a name he'd made her repeat. Years ago, after her father's funeral, he'd left her a sealed envelope with a handwritten note inside. "If you're ever in trouble, you can't explain to anyone else," he'd told her shortly before he died. "Not even your husband, call this woman." The note had held a name and number, Margaret Lewis, attorney. Her father had called her, "the one person I trust to keep a secret even from the law, until it's time." Laura had tucked that card into a desk drawer and promptly forgotten about it. Until now, when the desk itself was a pile of smoking rubble. But she still remembered the name, and roughly where the office had been in the old part of town. Near 1 a.m, Laura pulled up in front of a narrow 2-story building with peeling paint and a fading sign, "Lewis and Associates, Attorneys at Law." The street was almost deserted, half the streetlights dead. Ethan had finally fallen asleep, curled up in the back seat. Laura's phone battery blinked at 15%. She quickly searched the firm's number and dialed. It rang and rang, then cut off. She tried again. On the third attempt, someone picked up. A woman's voice, older, rough with sleep but sharply alert, said, "You've called my office 3 times at 1 a.m. I'm assuming this isn't about taxes." "This is Laura Hartman," she stammered. "My father was Richard Hartman. I'm outside your office. I need help." There was a short pause, then the woman's tone changed. "Don't talk on the phone. 50 yards ahead of you, there's a narrow alley beside a corner shop. Go down it. Green door on the left. Knock 3 times. Quickly." The line went dead. Heart hammering, Laura drove slowly into the alley, found the scuffed green door, and parked where the car couldn't be easily seen from the street. She woke Ethan gently, lifted him into her arms, and carried him to the door. Her knuckles had barely touched the wood 3 times when it swung inward without a sound. A small, wiry woman in her late 60s stood there, silver hair twisted into a neat bun, glasses perched low on her nose. She wore a long skirt and a buttoned blouse, and her eyes were sharp as scalpels as they flicked over Laura and Ethan. "Come in," she said, not unkindly, but with the briskness of someone used to emergencies. She locked the door behind them, sliding 3 different bolts into place, then led them into a compact, tidy apartment lined with books and file boxes that smelled faintly of paper and jasmine tea. "Sit," she instructed, moving toward a small kitchen. "I'll make tea. Then you're going to tell me everything from the beginning. No detail left out." Laura sank onto a stiff sofa, Ethan pressed against her side. When Margaret returned with 3 mugs of hot tea and a plate of plain cookies, the warmth and the simple normalcy of the scene nearly broke her. She wrapped her hands around the mug to steady their shaking and began to talk. She told Margaret about the airport, about Ethan's whispered warning, about the dead-end street and the dark van and the men with keys, about the flames swallowing her life. Margaret listened without interrupting, face unreadable, only nodding now and then as if ticking off boxes in her mind. When Laura finished, Ethan spoke up in a small, steady voice, filling in the gaps. He told them how he'd heard Daniel that morning on the phone in his home office saying, "Once they're asleep, make sure it's done. Get the stuff from the safe. Everything else can burn." He talked about other nights too, waking up thirsty and hearing his father yelling at invisible enemies over the phone, threatening to bring them all down if they crossed him, then opening the heavy fireproof safe in the study and writing in a small black notebook. "Fireproof?" Margaret repeated sharply. Ethan nodded. "Dad said it could survive anything. He kept a black diary in there. He called it his insurance." Laura's breath caught. The safe, mounted in the wall of Daniel's study, had been installed years ago by her father. He'd joked that if the whole house burned down, that safe would still be sitting there in the ashes. Daniel had begged for the combination when he was still trying to impress his new father-in-law. Laura's father had eventually given it to him. Now that decision felt like a curse. "If the safe was his insurance," Margaret said slowly, "then it's still out there, in the ruins." Laura shook her head, almost laughing from sheer exhaustion. "Even if it is, what good does it do us? Daniel will get to it first. He'll claim it's his property." Margaret's lips curved into a grim, thin smile. "He thinks he's the clever one," she said, "but your father was smarter than he ever knew." She crossed to a locked filing cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled out a thick folder. Your father came to me years ago when you were newly married. He set up 2 wills. The first, she tapped the folder, is the one Daniel knows about, the bait. It leaves this house, a modest education fund for Ethan and not much else. That's what your husband thinks he married into. And the second? Laura whispered. The real will, Margaret said. Your father was far wealthier than he let on. Properties in several cities, investment accounts, gold, rare collectibles, all wrapped into a strict trust. That trust can only be fully accessed if one of 2 things happens. You turn 40, or both you and Ethan are declared dead. You're 32. Daniel is drowning in gambling debts and bad investments. He can't afford to wait 8 years. But if you die, she let the sentence hang. Laura covered her mouth, finally seeing the cold logic through the fog of grief. He planned to kill us for my father's money, Laura whispered, and to use the fire and his trip as an alibi. Margaret nodded. That's what it looks like. I've been watching Daniel for a while, on your father's request. I know about the offshore casinos, the illegal loans, the client's money he reallocated to cover his losses. He's cornered. In his mind, there was one perfect escape, a tragic house fire while he's away on business. A grieving widower, sole surviving heir. He'd walk into court with your death certificates and walk out with a fortune. Laura cried then, quietly, shoulders shaking, Ethan pressed against her. Her marriage, her life, every tender word and soft kiss of the man she'd loved suddenly looked like carefully placed stones in a path leading straight to her grave. When she could finally breathe again, she wiped her face. You said my father was smarter, she managed. What did he actually do? Margaret opened the folder and slid out a single page. Your father spread his wealth across safety deposit boxes in different banks under different names. To access them, we need 2 things. The original second will, which I have, and the master list of all the boxes, which he hid in one specific box. And Daniel knows about that box? Laura asked. He suspects, Margaret replied. There's one deposit box in your real name at Heritage National Bank downtown. Your father told you about it once, didn't he? Something about storing childhood keepsakes? Laura nodded slowly. She remembered talking about it to Daniel one evening, laughing over her father's sentimental side. Your father knew Daniel was listening, Margaret said. He designed that box as a lure. It can only be opened with 2 identical keys. One he gave you as a pendant. Margaret's eyes flicked to Laura's empty neckline, remembering the small silver key that had melted in the fire. And the twin he gave to me. Daniel never knew there was a second key. Even if we have my father's key, how does that help us? Laura asked. Daniel thinks I'm dead. Exactly, Margaret said. He thinks you and Ethan died in the fire. He thinks his plan worked. Right now he's probably on his way home to play the part of the broken widower. As soon as he can, he'll turn his attention to that deposit box. He believes it's the doorway to the fortune he killed for. We're going to let him walk right into it. She outlined the plan. One of her contacts, a low-level employee at a firm Daniel owed money to, would pose as a desperate go-between. The man, Eddie, would call Daniel, claiming Laura had turned up panicked and on the run a few days before the fire. According to the story, she'd given Eddie the only valuable thing she had time to grab, a small key on a chain, saying it belonged to a deposit box her father had told her about. Then, she'd vanished. Now Eddie, drowning in his own debts, wanted cash. He would offer to sell the key. Daniel, convinced Laura was either dead or unhinged, would leap at the chance. With that fake key in hand, plus forged documents, a bogus death certificate, and a faked power of attorney from Laura, he'd try to open the box. 2 days later, that's exactly what happened. On hidden surveillance arranged by Margaret's contacts, Daniel met Eddie in a crowded mall parking lot, paid him a wad of crumpled bills, and walked away, clutching a small tarnished key like it was a lifeline. That night he stayed up drafting the false papers, using his last shady connections to obtain a forged certificate listing Laura and Ethan as deceased. Then he called Heritage National Bank and scheduled an appointment with the manager, Mr. Carter, to access his late wife's safety deposit box. He probably slept better that night than he had in months, believing salvation was finally within reach. The next morning, in the chilled air of the bank's vault, Laura sat on a straight-backed chair in a private booth normally used for clients reviewing their valuables. Ethan perched beside her, his fingers curled tightly around hers. Across the small room, Margaret stood with her arms folded, eyes fixed on the door. Two plainclothes detectives leaned against the wall, quiet as statues. Mr. Carter had smuggled them all in through a staff entrance an hour earlier. Now they waited in tense silence, the hum of the vault's air system the only sound. Laura's heart hammered so loudly she was sure the others could hear it. Out in the corridor, footsteps approached on the marble floor, accompanied by Mr. Carter's smooth, sympathetic voice. "This is a terrible tragedy, Mr. Miller. I'm so sorry for your loss." Daniel's voice followed, hoarse and perfectly broken. "Thank you. I want to take care of whatever my wife left behind. It's too painful to leave it hanging." Laura shut her eyes, every practiced lie slicing through her. "You have the key and the documents?" the manager asked. "Yes," Daniel replied, rustling papers. "Her death certificate, the power of attorney she signed when she was feeling overwhelmed. She wanted me to handle everything if something happened." "Everything appears to be in order," Mr. Carter said smoothly. "Let me escort you to the box." Footsteps drew nearer, passing the hidden booth. A lock clicked in the vault wall as Mr. Carter inserted the bank's key into the box. "And now yours, sir," he said. There was a metallic scrape as Daniel slid his key in and turned it. The door swung open. Daniel must have been picturing stacks of gold, thick bundles of bonds, a neat roadmap to untold wealth. Laura imagined the greedy light that would spark in his eyes. Instead of letting him examine the contents in the open, Mr. Carter's voice shifted politely. "There is one more formality. According to our records, Mrs. Hartman's father appointed a guardian to oversee this box whenever an heir tried to access it, just for verification. She's waiting in the private booth. If you'll step inside." The booth door opened. One of the detectives pulled it inward, and Daniel stepped through, already rehearsing whatever lines he thought would sound most wounded and dignified. He looked older than Laura remembered, thinner, dark circles carved beneath his eyes. For a split second, his brain refused to process what he was seeing. Laura sat across from him, very much alive, wearing the pale blue scarf he'd given her for her last birthday. Ethan sat beside her, his gaze calm and unblinking. The color drained from Daniel's face so completely he looked almost transparent. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. He stumbled backward, one hand reaching out as if to ward off ghosts. The air in the small room turned thick as concrete. Then Ethan's small, clear voice cut through it. "Looking for us, Dad?" Daniel flinched at the word. Laura slowly raised her hand. She wasn't holding a key, but a black leather notebook, edges scorched but intact. The diary from the safe. She had recovered it days earlier from the fireproof box in Daniel's study, under the supervision of investigators combing through the ruins. "Or were you looking for this?" she asked quietly. Recognition and terror flashed in his eyes. He spun toward the doorway, but he got only one step before the two detectives seized his arms, their grips iron tight. Behind them, Mr. Carter and Margaret watched, faces hard. "Daniel Miller," Margaret said, stepping fully into the light, "your game is over." Daniel sagged between the officers, the fight going out of him as quickly as it had flared. He didn't yell or plead. He just stared at Laura, at Ethan, at the notebook that had betrayed him. True fear replaced the performance of grief. Fear not of fire this time, but of exposure. Without another word, the detectives marched him out of the vault and into a waiting police car, leaving Laura shaking but upright, Ethan's small hand still anchored in hers. In the interrogation room at the station, a gray box of a space with a metal table and 3 chairs, Daniel tried every role he knew. First, he shouted that this was a setup, that Margaret had wanted Richard Hartman's money for years and had turned his unstable daughter against him. He insisted Laura had staged her own disappearance and framed him, that he'd been miles away at an airport, publicly falling apart on live television as he watched his home burn. Detective Harris listened with a bored expression, sliding photocopies of the forged documents across the table, the fake death certificate, the fabricated power of attorney. Handwriting analysts had already flagged the signature as forged, the notary's stamp as bogus. The forger, picked up at the docks that morning, had been eager to trade his testimony for a lighter sentence. When that angle faltered, Daniel blamed Eddie, claiming the key seller had tricked him into coming to the bank. "You have nothing solid," he spat. "Just a hysterical wife, a greedy lawyer, and some paperwork that can be explained. I was out of town. Hundreds of people saw me." Margaret, standing in the corner with arms folded, finally spoke. "Alibis are lovely things," she said mildly, "until someone finds out what you were doing before you needed one." She laid the black diary on the table, flipping it open. Page after page was filled with Daniel's handwriting, dates, names, amounts wired to loan sharks and hired thugs, detailed notes about the plan and the insurance locked in his safe. Daniel recoiled as if the book might bite him. "That's not mine," he snapped. "You planted it. You put it in the safe after the fire." Detective Harris shook his head. "Honestly, we don't even need this." He nodded toward the door. Another officer wheeled in a small cart with a laptop and a tiny projector. "Your son likes spy gadgets, Mr. Miller," the detective said. "He bought a little toy camera a while back, put it on the bookshelf in your study because he was worried about you. You remember that robot toy he showed you? The video they played was grainy but clear enough. Time-stamped 2 nights before the fire, the footage showed Daniel at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, pacing the room. Audio from the toy's microphone was surprisingly crisp. "The plan goes ahead tomorrow night," his voice boomed in the interrogation room. "I'll be at the airport, cameras everywhere. Gas leak, electrical fault, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. Just make sure they're asleep. Burn it all, but don't forget the black diary in the office safe. That's my insurance. I need that book. Everything else can turn to ash." The next clip, recorded the previous night, showed Daniel with 2 men whose backs were to the camera. "No mistakes," he told them. "Once Laura and the kid are gone, the estate unlocks. You get the rest of your money when I have the papers. We all walk away rich." When the projector went dark, the silence in the room was suffocating. Daniel stared at the table, shoulders slumped, the last of his bravado leaking away. Any claim of a setup, of manipulation, died right there. Behind a one-way mirror, Laura stood with Ethan pressed to her side, his ears covered by her hands. She heard every word. Daniel eventually muttered that he'd been desperate, cornered by violent creditors, that they'd threatened Laura and Ethan, and he'd had no choice. Margaret's expression didn't soften. "You always had a choice," she said quietly. "You chose yourself." The formal confession followed, then the charges: attempted double homicide, arson, fraud, and more. The trial became a media storm. Headlines about the airport alibi husband and the 7-year-old hero with a toy camera splashed across news sites. Laura and Ethan stayed out of sight, their faces kept off television by court order and Margaret's relentless efforts. In court, Daniel's lawyers tried to poke holes in the case, but the combination of diary, forged documents, bank sting, and incriminating video left no room for doubt. The judge called Daniel's actions one of the most cold-blooded betrayals of family I have ever seen, and sentenced him to life in prison with no possibility of parole. In the years that followed, news trickled back through Margaret's contacts. The loan sharks and criminal middlemen whose names Daniel had recorded in his diary did not appreciate his detailed bookkeeping. Inside prison, he was no longer a charming businessman, but a liability. Every day, he woke up to the consequences of his own greed, trapped in the very kind of cage he'd once planned for his wife and child. Karma, Laura thought, had a long memory. Weeks after the verdict, Laura and Margaret returned to the vault at Heritage National Bank, this time in daylight, with legitimate court orders and the real key. Mr. Carter led them to the same box Daniel had opened. Inside, they found no gold, no bonds, only a single envelope and a small, neat notebook. The envelope held a letter from Laura's father, written in his familiar, careful script. In it, he explained why he'd hidden his wealth. He wanted Laura to build a life based on love, not money, and he'd seen something in Daniel that made him wary. The notebook contained a list of banks, aliases, and box numbers, a treasure map leading to the real estate, investments, and savings he'd accumulated. It took months of paperwork, signatures, and quiet trips to different banks before the full picture emerged. Laura was far richer than she'd ever imagined. wealthy enough that she and Ethan would never need to worry about bills or debts again. But standing in Margaret's office with the final statement spread out before her, the numbers felt almost obscene. This was the money Daniel had tried to kill them for, the invisible weight that had nearly crushed her life. Laura made one more choice. Any assets that had ever been in Daniel's name, anything tied to his business, she sold or surrendered and donated the proceeds to children's charities. She refused to touch a cent that smelled like him. Time, therapy, and distance did what they do best. A year later, Laura and Ethan lived in a modest house on the edge of town, far from the manicured lawns and gossiping neighbors of their old subdivision. Their new place had a small garden where wildflowers grew and a porch where the afternoon sun pooled like honey. On weekends, the sound of Ethan's laughter echoed through the yard as he chased butterflies or kicked a soccer ball against the fence. He still woke from nightmares sometimes, but less often. His quiet watchfulness was still there, but now it was balanced by a boyish joy that had been missing for too long. Laura did more than settle into comfortable anonymity. With Margaret's guidance, she used her father's inheritance to create something he would have been proud of, the Hartman Legacy Foundation. Its offices, in a renovated brick building downtown, bore a simple sign and an open door. The foundation funded scholarships for sharp-eyed kids from struggling families, children like Ethan whose instincts and observations were often dismissed. It also offered free legal aid and safe housing to women and children trying to escape abusive or manipulative relationships, giving them the lifeline Laura had been given when she knocked on a green door in the middle of the night. On a soft, golden afternoon, Laura sat on the front steps of their house, stirring a mug of jasmine tea, watching Ethan run through the grass with a net in his hand, utterly absorbed in chasing a white butterfly. The weight in her chest that had once felt like a stone now felt more like a scar, still there but no longer bleeding. Ethan spotted something, abandoned the net and trotted over, holding out a slightly crumpled daisy. "For you, Mom," he said, grinning, cheeks flushed from play. Laura's throat tightened as she took the flower, its petals bright against her fingers. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, pulling him into a hug. He wrapped his arms around her and, after a moment, whispered into her shoulder, "Thank you for believing me that night." The same words that had once been a desperate plea now sounded like a quiet, amazed gratitude. Laura kissed the top of his head and held him closer. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," she murmured. "You're my hero, Ethan. You saved us." They sat there for a long moment, mother and son framed by sunlight and birdsong, the ghosts of fire and betrayal finally fading into the background. If this story shook you, tell me in the comments what you would have done in Laura's place. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss the next one.